Thanks again. And I'm going to start off by talking about what our main topics are today, and that is the AMMonitor R package, as well as a kind of cloud-hosted version of AMMonitor, which we're calling Amber. And I'd like to fully acknowledge Larry, Kate, and Kayley, who are co-presenters with me today. These three people are made fantastic contributions to the packages themselves, as well as Kathleen Balantic, Caroline Tang, and John Katz, who were previous students and postdocs of mine going back several years. So what are we talking about today? We are talking about wildlife monitoring with trail cameras and audio recorders. These are basically low-cost, easy ways to collect a lot of monitoring data very quickly. With audio recorders, you typically set them out in a place you want to do monitoring, and then you record your wildlife on a schedule or a timer. And then with trail cameras, we're talking about units that are deployed that are typically triggered when wildlife cross its path. This is an easy way to collect a lot of data, and it also is a lot of fun. You can learn a ton of information about the species you want to learn about. So, for example, in Vermont here, we've been studying moose, and we've been able to use trail cameras to study distribution patterns, look at evidence of breeding. We've also been able to document behaviors, and we've been able to find indicators of health. And I'm just realizing, did I just move something off the screen there?
No, it looks good.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you. So, for example, this individual moose has a very poor coat condition because it's being infested by lots of winter ticks. So cameras have really helped us to understand lots of different things. The last example is interactions with other species. This is a series of images that were captured in the Green Mountain National Forest. And they show moths drinking tears from moose. And this is a paper that Larry led and just came out recently in Ecosphere. On the audio side, I want to highlight a study that Kate's been leading, and it centers on the Cuban tree frog. This is a problematic species that's invasive to Florida, Georgia, and Louisiana, and it's predatory on other species as well, and it really outcompetes our native tree frogs. So early detection is really critical to prevent some new establishments. And it emits a very distinctive call. So it's a good monitoring candidate for this passive acoustic monitoring. So Kate has led this work with our collaborators from the USGS Army program, Amphibian Research and Monitoring Initiative. And they are collaborators who include Hardin Waddle and Brad Glorioso. They set out recorders at 13 different locations, and they collected almost 140,000 recordings, 7,000 hours of audio in search of the Cuban tree frog. And that's just far too much audio to manually inspect. And so what Kate was able to do was to develop a two-stage approach for detecting tree frogs, and she was able to come up with a system that rapidly analyzed those hours of audio. And then one last example, this is a study that Kayley is leading, and Kayley's doing this work for her master's degree. She's studying early successional habitat management in Vermont, and she's going to be using both trail cameras and audio to study a suite of focal bird and mammal species. And she'll be using multi-species occupancy modeling for analysis in a big sense. Like most things that we do, the goal is for us to learn about wildlife, to learn about ecology, to learn how to manage them better or how to proactively conserve them. And so these tools are really, really becoming very popular. But along with those massive amounts of data that can be collected, these units and this method of monitoring has lots of challenges and limitations. And the top one, data management, it really truly can be overwhelming and prone to errors because you can amass terabytes of data in no time. Second, it takes way too long to manually inspect these media files. It can be difficult to learn how to collaborate and share your data. And then this last point, a monitoring program really is all encompassing. It involves people, it involves your study sites, it involves your equipment, it involves all the media files you've collected, and the tags, which are both human-made tags and machine model tags. All of those things need to be tracked. And so that is the major motivator behind the AMMonitor package. So this brings us to AMMonitor, which is the focus of our seminar. What is it? It is a software package, and it was developed by me and a whole bunch of really talented people at the Vermont Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit. We just released the second version on the USGS repository. It focuses on remote biodiversity monitoring with trail cameras and recording units. And it really is a suite of functions that enables an effective, repeatable pipeline to help you to get through your data very quickly and get you to places for why we collect this data in the first place, which is to improve our knowledge. There's an accompanying package called AMSDM, which is in development. SDM is an acronym for both species distribution modeling and structured decision making, and Kate will be talking about that a little bit later. The package is free. It's hosted at code.usgs.gov. Kayley's going to show you how to download that and get started. And it really is targeted for a single user. And by that, I don't mean one person is doing all of the work. I mean, there's really one PI who is at the helm, the keeper of the keys, who's controlling basically the database. And we like to talk about AMMonitor with this wheel. Beginning over here, we begin with remote data collection, trail cameras and acoustic recorders. All the media files can be stored in the cloud or they can be stored locally and they can be released on USGS Sciencebase. Those files in turn can be tagged by both humans and by machines. And then this last piece here, this is the backbone of AMMonitor is a SQLite database that really keeps track of everything. And this is just such a critical part of the software itself. And you'll see that when you work with AMMonitor, you're basically working with this database. If you haven't worked with relational databases before, don't let it scare you. It's just a collection of tables that store specific pieces of information and are really designed to help you track things easily. So these yellow pieces here of the pie really are about the package AMMonitor. And these last two pieces of the pie are about the accompanying package that Kate is leading that helps you to build species distribution models and to use the data in some kind of decision support. So that's where we're headed. And the next person I'm going to pass off to is Kayley. Kayley's going to introduce the AMMonitor package itself. How do you install it and show you some of the basic features? Then she's going to pass the ball over to Larry, who will demonstrate the Shiny interface that comes with the package. And then Kate is going to illustrate a real case study by rehydrating a published data release on the USGS Sciencebase repository. And then she'll also briefly introduce her AMSDM package. And then finally, Larry's going to take us home and introduce Amber, which is really kind of a cloud-based collaborative version of AMMonitor. And as Jody mentioned, we'll be happy to share our code and our slides after the seminar is over. So with that, I'll stop sharing and pass it to Kayley.
Hi, everyone. Uh, Yeah, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Terry, and to Jody and Grace for the overall introduction and hosting this. And as Terry said, I am really going to be giving us an overview of AMMonitor, kind of brief getting started, show what the package can do, and the basic pieces that you'll likely be working with in an AMMonitor project. So I am going to share my screen. Right. So as Terry mentioned previously, all of our materials are going to be made available at the end of this. So you will also have access to this wonderful little Quarto document that myself and Kate will be working on. But I'm just going to walk through all of the basics now. And of course, to start, we have to start with just how do you install AMMonitor? Let's say you've got some kind of remote monitoring project and you're potentially interested in using this. Where do we find it? Well, as Terry mentioned, it's hosted on the USGS GitLab, and I've included the exact URL here, which I can also pull up through this code chunk. And my bar is in place. Here we go. So our repository is here. It is available. And we've got a pretty extensive README that I just wanted to take a minute to point out that includes all the kind of basic information, a great little overview, potentially useful papers, and the same information on things like information and getting started, or very similar to what we'll be covering now. So if you want to go back and reference any of this or get started, just know that this is a great place to do that. But I'm going to walk through something very similar to this live with you today. First things first, for installation, we do recommend increasing your timeout slightly. The package is decently large because we include some example data to work with a kind of example monitoring project. So it can take a minute to download, and we recommend including this so it doesn't fail. And then you'll just need to install this remotes package, which you can install just by going into your packages, clicking this install button. It should be available on CRAN to be able to install from GitLab. And then this whole block of code is available on the repository as well. And like I said, this will be available to download our most recent release. If for any reason this doesn't work, we also have the compiled software available on our releases tab, including a zip and a tar. And either of these can also be installed by just downloading that file and going into install, and then instead selecting package archive. So for any reason you have trouble with installing it by code, the most current release is up to date with the version that is currently installed through the code as well. And once it's installed, we're just going to library the package. For anyone here in R who might not be as familiar with R, this is just making all of the tools in AMMonitor available to us. And you'll notice it comes up with a little intro message. Hey, if you're just getting started, check out our AMMonitor tutorials. I did just want to mention these briefly. Like I said, I'm giving a very wide overview of everything that AMMonitor has to offer. It's got a lot of adaptability and different options to suit the needs of different projects. So I'm going to go over the basics, but if you have an actual project you're looking at, or if you just want to dive more into all the different things that the package can do, we have this whole suite of 20 different available tutorials. And these are all numbered and labeled clearly. So you can either walk through these if you're interested in them, or if you've got a specific topic, maybe you're working with some media files, that you can jump to that exact tutorial. So this is just a resource I wanted to make sure you guys were aware of. And you can just run any of these with this Learn R Run tutorial function. These are all interactive. We put a lot of work into them. So hopefully they're of use to people, and a great jumping off point on top of what the kind of basics we'll be doing today. And in terms of those basics, the first step to AMMonitor is to really set up a new AMMonitor project. And this just consists of two key components: the directory structure that AMMonitor uses and the database that Terry has already mentioned. And these are ways that we really deal with that data management problem by having a great structured place for everything to go. And that allows us to add a lot of great quality of life features to the package. The directory structure can be created using this AMM create directories function. And for this example, I'm just going to create a new test project in our temporary directory for an example. But if you were doing a real project, you might want to, for example, start with an RStudio project that would set it as the working directory, and then create these directories in that. So for this, we're just going to run this little create directories code into the tempter and just call it my project, and then we'll capture the file path. And I know that this has said we've created a new project. It tells us all the folders in that directory structure, and that we've captured that file path here. And I can, like I said, normally I would want to set this as a working directory for a project, but for our purposes right now, I can just get this information here, and I'm going to take this and I'll swap our little file explorer here. And this gets a little finicky about slashes, so I need to fix this really quickly. This is the difference between R and Windows, fun stuff. But this will just let us actually browse all of those directories. And we'll open that up. And now we can see our AMMonitor directory structure. There's quite a few folders here, and we can also look at this through code. I just want to hone in on a couple of key folders that you'll interact with really regularly. That includes this database folder where the database will be stored, as well as these photos and recordings folders where any media that you're keeping track of in the database can be stored as well. These other folders can include things like analysis information, covariate data for modeling, settings for the project, and files that have not yet been added to the database. Any of these drop folders we purposely intended for things like scripts where you can make easy workflows that will basically allow you to add data in a streamlined way to your database and then move them into the standard folder, the permanent folders here. So that's all you need to do to set up your directory structure. And now we just need to create our database. So now that we have that, we can put our new database into our database folder using this db create function. And we'll just name our database myproject.sqlite. This is because it's what's called a SQLite database, and I'll talk about that in just a second. And we tend to use this naming convention of having the name of the database match what we call the project. So we can just put it in our database folder by using that project file path. And by using this DB source of default, we're just creating a fresh, new, clean database. So I will create that new database. You'll see it's creating a whole bunch of tables and tells us that it's successfully created a new AMMonitor database. And as this shows, there's quite a few tables in AMMonitor. This is because AMMonitor is a SQLite relational database. And as Terri said, it's really just a set of specific tables. And these tables are connected to each other via keys that allow us to kind of ensure consistency and data integrity across those tables. So I put a little example graphic here showing a couple of our tables where we have locations, equipment, and people, which all link into this visits table. And basically this just means that any specific record of any of these additional tables, where, who, what, is linked to a specific value in each of these tables. And this means that you don't get any weird mismatches or records that don't really match up across the database. And we can do this across all the different tables in AMMonitor. To take a little bit of a deeper look, we're going to set a connection to our new database using this dbSetCon function. This just connects to the database and makes sure we're enforcing all of those data integrity rules. And then we can interact with it with functions in this DBI package. This gives us all kinds of basic functions to interact with the database, including making changes directly to the database and reading any of that information to work with it in R. So we're going to set that connection and then look at all of our tables. And you can see our connection now appears in our global environment. And we have this big list of tables. Like I said, AMMonitor has a lot of features. So I'm just going to focus in on a small subset of these that you'll probably regularly be working with. That includes the people, locations, and equipment tables. These are pretty much what they say on the tin. It's who's working on a project, the locations where you're doing your monitoring, and the equipment that you're using to do that monitoring. And I group these together because they all come together to form what we call a visit. And this is kind of our basic unit for AMMonitor, where it's any specific instance of a person going to a monitoring location to work with a piece of monitoring equipment at a given time. This includes deploying that equipment, checking it for data, or pulling it from the field. And this is often the unit we'll work with any kind of workflow in AMMonitor. We then also have our media table, which is just recording all of the photos and or recordings that we've collected. And each of those media is then associated with a visit. This is important because it then lets us track it back to all of our original metadata. So we can say who picked up that unit or deployed it, when was it recorded, and where was that data collected. This can be great, for example, if you have a camera that might glitch out in the middle of the season, having all this metadata is helpful. I hope you guys can't hear that. My dogs are being loud.
We can.
Oh, girls. I need you to behave, sweethearts. Monty, it's okay. Sorry about that. Um, and then from our media files, we have two different ways. Monty, enough. We can have tags on our data. Those can be tags that are manually made by users. This is often for smaller scale monitoring projects. Monty, thank you. And we can also have potentially outputs for machine learning models. So we have this whole series of tables, models, model outputs, and model verifications for dealing with any of these kinds of automated detection tools. Tell us what kind of tools we used, what predictions they made, and whether they've been reviewed by people. And these are really the basic pieces that you need to get started with any given AMMonitor project. There's also a lot of ways that you can actually add new records through both functions in AMMonitor. Some of these basic DVI functions allow you to interact with the database, or even through our RShiny app, which I believe Larry's going to demo in a little bit. And I'm not going to go too far into the weeds there, but I do want to show what an example that actually has some data looks like. So we have this little demo database that kind of comes with the package, and you can always recreate this to experiment with anything you want in the package using this AMM create mini demo option. So I'm just going to create a little demo folder here. And this, as I said, some of this takes a second, but this is going to populate a whole little demo database with some actual records in it that we can then take a look at and see what an actual monitoring project might look like. That should be about finished up. There we go. And I can also swap over to my temperature here, and I can actually pull up this demo directory where we can now actually look at a directory structure that has some populated folders. We can look at this through code or through our user interface here. So we can see what all is in our photos, and we can see we've got a whole list of photos that have been collected for this project. We can also view them in our files panel in our studio. But we don't have any information about these photos just by looking at the fact that the files exist, right? So we can then connect to our demo database to actually get the information about this monitoring project. And since we're using the standard AMMonitor structure, we know that we should be able to find that database in our database folder with the name of our project of demo. So I'll set this new connection, which we now also see pops up in our environment. And now we can start exploring what's in this database. Really useful function is going to be this DBI read table, which basically just takes any one of these database tables and turns it into an R data frame. And we can take a look at this and see we've had a whole series of visits occurring at 3 different monitoring sites with both audio recorders and cameras deployed by our wonderful field technician, Mr. Frodo Baggins. And within these visits, we have units being set, checked for data, and ultimately pulled from the field. So any of these visits where we either checked a unit for data or pulled it, we would expect to potentially have associated media. So we can then check our media table and see what's going on with that. And I just wanted to kind of make the point here that just as we can easily just pull this up and view it, we can also store these as objects in R to work with directly. So we'll see that if I save the media object out, it now shows up in my environment, and I can work with this just as I would any other R data frame. So if you aren't super familiar with databases, and if you prefer to work more in R, you can read any of these tables in and do any of your regular operations, merging, subsetting, data wrangling, and cleaning, all of that just by pulling these tables into R. And in these, we can see we've got a whole series of photos that are associated with specific visits that would then associate them with when, where, who, as well as specific start dates and times for that media, and a couple other potentially useful fields like where that media is stored. Since ours is stored in our standard AMMonitor structure, we don't actually need to specify it in the database. Now, one thing that is worth noting here is since this is just a table, this doesn't actually let us view these images and see what's in them or to make annotations because it's just the text data. So with that in mind, I'm going to pass this over to Larry, who's going to show how we can use our RShiny app. This is basically a user interface that comes with the package to actually view all of this data, to potentially add tags or other work, as well as just interact with the database and some other potentially useful workflows.
Thanks, Kayley. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. And while I'm sharing it, just to summarize, Kayley showed us how to install AMMonitor, how to create a project and a database, also how to create a demo database pre-populated with some data. And one of the real strengths of AMMonitor is its ability to fully integrate into R so that, especially if you're like a grad student, you're doing research, that you can write your own custom scripts to work with that data however you want. But there are certain actions, like Kayley mentioned, connecting the media files, the actual pictures or sound recordings to the metadata that's stored in the database is something that's best done through a user interface. Or if you're not a really proficient or heavy R user, our app allows you a way to just dive right into the data without any code needed. So I'm going to try one more time to share my screen here. With any luck, you can all now see my RStudio window. If someone can, all right, I see thumbs up. And so we're going to pick up right where Kayley left off. So I've loaded in the AMMonitor package. I have built the demo database. This demo database, as Kayley mentioned, comes with the package. So later on when the code is released, you'll be able to launch the app and look at the same exact database that I'm about to show you now. And then we'll use the launch app function, which takes just one argument, which is the file path to our project that we just created. So I'll go ahead and launch that. And depending on how your RStudio is configured, it'll either launch within RStudio or, like you're seeing here, in my case, it launches in your web browser. But this is not a web page. The little IP address here at the top indicates that we are, all running this through RStudio. And so the next thing we'll do is select our username and login. And in this case, we have a custom setting that allows you to specify the default user as Sam Gamgee. We do keep track of who's logged in. That way, if you do any tagging or anything like that, it can be associated back to an individual user, as you'll see in a minute. But once we connect to the database, we get a little bit of information about our DB, as well as a couple of different options along this table, along this menu on the left. And I'm going to walk through each of these one by one, starting with the database. So our database tab shows a full functioning front end to the database where you can browse through any of those tables. Kayley had showed us a little bit of the people table that we use to keep track of personnel related to our project. And she also showed us how to read in the visits table. So I'm just going to jump to visits now. And the database front end is often populated through other AMMonitor functions, which we'll see in a minute. But this is a great way to look at overviews of your data, to run simple filters. You can also make edits and deletions and add records and filter your data. And so let's say, as a practical use case, I am a PI and I want to coordinate some upcoming field work. And so I'd like to look at all of the visits that took place at location C and look at them in order from most recent to least recent. And so I can do that by showing the filters, specifying that we want to look just at visits from location C, and then we can even sort those backwards by visit date. And now we can see all the most recent visits to take place at location C. Another useful table is the locations table, where we keep track of all of our information about monitoring sites. And in this case, because the locations, every visit has a location, and that visits and locations tables are linked, we also have the ability to look at a subtable here. So a lot of our database tables have this option where we can look at all of the visits associated with location C using this little drop down, and again, sort them in descending order as we prepare for our next field season. And we do have the ability to download a full database table. So this is similar to what Kayley showed us before, using the DBI package to read a table using code. There's also a way to do that just through a point and click interface and download the entire locations table. But let's say we wanted to run more advanced querying. Because SQLite is a SQL-based language, we can enter custom SQL statements. And we won't be able to teach you how to write your own SQL statements today, but I'll give you a demonstration. So let's say that same table, or that same query we just looked at, filtering visits by location C. We can select star as our wildcard. That means everything. And we're going to select everything from our visits table, except we're going to only take records where the location ID is equal to location C. And so if we go ahead and run that query, we see all of the same data returned. Our list isn't sorted yet, but these SQL statements are easily extendable. So we could add order by visit date, and we'll add a little descending flag So now we have our same exact table as before, and then we can download this to work with. And these query statements do take a little bit of effort to set up, but one of the nice things about them is that you can write really sophisticated queries that involve merges and aggregating data and summarizing data. And you only need to write that SQL statement once, and then you can reuse that using this custom query function whenever you want as the database is updated. So that's an overview of some of the functionality of our database front end. Now I want to talk about our mini apps. And the mini apps are an extensible part of AMMonitor that we're frequently adding to in new releases. And each of these mini apps is a tabular workflow that moves you step through a process to do some sort of action with the database. So we have many apps for adding taxa to the database. We have a taxa table that stores information about all the species, and this will scrape the taxonomic tree and scientific names from the web. We have apps that will allow you to add different models of equipment and machine learning models to your database. But I'm going to highlight and give an example of this register visits app. And this is going to be the easiest way to get media files into your database. And so after you select the app name, you can launch the app. And here's an example of the tabular workflow beginning with a set of instructions. And then you'll just click your way from tab to tab, and it'll prompt you with new requests. In this case, I'm going to give an example of adding photo data. I'm going to make this a new visit at location C. The location took place today with camera number 3. Gandalf was our field tech who did this field visit, and we checked the camera. And then we can click on to next. And it'll then prompt you to select a source directory. This could be just reading directly from your card reader with your SD card plugged in. I have pre-downloaded a few photos that I'll use for this example in my new photos folder, and it'll show us all of the photos that appear in that folder. And then once it does, we can click select. We have a couple options for where the process data can be saved to. I'm going to save them locally to my AMMonitor project directory, but you can look at the media tutorial for more information about using any of these cloud providers to store your data, which is particularly useful for big projects. But then we'll go ahead and click next. We'll run a quick data check. This is for data integrity to compare back to our database, and no problems are found. So now we're ready to go ahead and add the new visit to our database. And we see here that we've added 8 new media files. Once you get photos or recordings into your database, how do you actually look at them and interact with them? That's going to be what I'll talk about for the remainder of this demonstration. We have both photo tools and audio tools. The photo tools include a photo viewer, which I'm going to show you. For the sake of time, we won't go through the audio tools, but the functionality is very parallel, with the exception that because we're working with acoustic data, you can not only listen to it with a fully functioning audio player, but you can also visualize a spectrogram, adjust those spectrogram settings, and work with that acoustic data in many of the ways you'd hope to with a software like this. Otherwise, the two media tools are essentially parallel. They each have 4 different primary functionalities. A viewer, which is essentially a read-only mode. You can see all of the data that we have associated with photos, but you can't edit or change. We have a tagger mode. So this is for if a human is logging in and labeling data to add custom annotations. We have the annotation verifications. This is going to allow you to verify existing labels. And then we have the model verifications here. And so I'm going to try just re-logging in, except instead of Sam, I'm going to try logging in as Gandalf. Did I spell that right? Of course I didn't. There we go. So now I'm logged in as Gandalf, and I'm ready to do some tagging. So I'm going to open up the tagger. I guess one more thing to mention before I do is that we do have a cheat sheet that goes through the full functionality. We won't have time to demo every single feature right here, right now. We also have some video tutorials. But just to take a very quick look at what this looks like in use, we can enter our photo tagger. And then, we've found when we've worked with this software that it's great to label photos by visit. So I'm going to pull up those photos that I just added just now, and we'll go ahead and apply that filter. I'm also going to boost the size of the image a little bit. And again, you can see the cheat sheet for all of the different functionality here. But now that I've got it pulled up, I'm ready to do some labeling. And the first picture is me. We often like to hold up a little sign, just to check the camera date. But I can label this photo as having a human. This dropdown is based on our taxa table. So if you have a new taxa that you want to add for your project, All of these dropdowns are controlled by the database. Based on the taxa that you select, you might have additional options, such as for humans, we can say that this is a human who's busy conducting research. And once you've selected all of the labels that you want to add to your database, you can simply click Add Record, and we can see that the database has been updated, and the tagger shows our new records here. All of these different labels are highly customizable. So regardless of what type of project you have, whether you're trying to study behavior or demography or anything else, you can customize these dropdowns to meet your needs. And then you can just move along to the next photo and start labeling your full data set. And so with that said, we've looked at some of the functionality for how you can now interact with your database through a user interface, through point and click actions rather than directly through code. But this is just a teeny little sample database. You might want to say, what if I want to leverage an existing data set? We've published a bunch of our data sets in the past, and we've actually used these software tools to produce labels for hundreds of thousands of images. And so, many of those data sets have been published, and I'm going to hand it over to Kate now, who will talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thanks, Larry, and thanks everyone for having us. Let me share my screen now. All right, great. So we're back in our Quarto document here. Yeah, so as Larry mentioned, we have looked at how to create your own empty database, and we've also explored our demo database, which comes with AMMonitor. But we actually have a lot of public data releases on USGS Sciencebase, which is the USGS research data repository. This is a free public access site where anyone can go and access these data releases, and all data releases go through a very strict peer review process. They all have a global identifier through a DOI. And we have published over 18 now different data releases of the work we've done with different collaborators over the years. So this is just a few. We've worked with Dartmouth, and we have some of their data here. We have Maine and Massachusetts, all over the U.S. You can access these databases on Sciencebase. And essentially, a data release is all of the information that is stored in an AMMonitor database, along with very detailed metadata about what the information actually describes. So this we can see is the Green Mountain National Forest, Volume 1. This is their data from 2016 to 2022. And they have 84,000 media files, which have been fully tagged. Some have machine model outputs from AI models used to apply species labels. And there's a lot of annotations by people of different species in this database. And in AMMonitor, we have this great function which does what we call rehydrating a project. So it's by rehydrating, essentially you're just downloading all of the data and recreating the original AMMonitor project. And anybody can do this. It's open source. All you need is to go to your data release on Sciencebase and grab this item number, which is in the URL. I've highlighted it here. And we use our SB rehydrate function. And you can do this with any release that's on Sciencebase. Just replace this number and change the project name. But I've gone ahead and rehydrated this Green Mountain National Forest database so we can take a look. I've stored the file path already. And we can connect to the database, just like Kayley showed us earlier. We'll make an open connection, which you can see comes up in the global environment. Let's take a look at the people table, which has all the information about the people in the project. And you'll see that for these public data releases that have gone through peer review and they're publicly accessible, we don't have any actual personally identifiable information for the people from this project, but we do have code names, display names that we use for those people. So you can attach those to annotations or visits that those people have been with. So you can still get your association to the person. And you can look at any table in the database. We've recreated it by rehydrating from ScienceBase. So if we look at the annotations table, for example, you can see we have this giant table of all sorts of species labels that different people in the project have applied to their media over those years of the project. So we have red fox, fisher, and it's important to note that the function doesn't download the media for you, but you definitely can download all of that media from ScienceBase and go in with the Shiny app, as Larry showed you, and look at all of these annotations in the app in real time. Another function of AMMonitor that I'll just quickly highlight is we have the ability to create summary reports from data from an AMMonitor database. So using our Green Mountain database, I'll create some summary data for 2018 to 2019. You can also subset by locations. And then we can pass that summary data to these functions that create generic tables and plots that you can use in reports. So for example, with this DB table summary function, I want to highlight moose as our key species and create some tables describing the monitoring project and any information we have about moose. So for example, you can see all of these tables are part of this object. So these are just generic tables that might be useful if you don't want to go ahead and make that yourself. This table shows the survey effort. So what is the actual time effort of monitoring that was done in terms of when a camera was deployed at the location over each year. We can also look at the table showing the number of annotations per location per year for our moose. We have many different tables that you can explore, and we also have the same sort of idea for our DB plot summary function, which just creates a bunch of ggplot objects. For example, we can look at the number of annotations per year per species. So this is a pretty cool plot where you can just see the number of annotations over the years for each of your species. So that kind of wraps up our demonstration of AMMonitor. And I'll go ahead and talk to you about our upcoming R package, which will complement AMMonitor. So coming back to the wheel that Terri introduced us to earlier, this is very similar to the work done at Effie. It's an adaptive management workflow where we're trying to use the data that we collect in modeling and decision analysis. We have our adaptive management workflow where we're using the data that we've collected and processed in modeling and decision support, and then using what we find out in that decision process to inform our monitoring next time. And all of the yellow here is what's encompassed in the AMMonitor R package that is already released that you can all access now. But currently, modeling and decision support is currently manual and individually coded. And Kayley introduced us to the idea of the tables in our relational database, and there's many. This is just some. A key table is the model outputs table. And this is very important for projects that use machine learning models or AI models to apply species labels to their media without the need of people needing to go in and listen to every audio file or look at every image. So all of those species labels end up in this table. And for even moderate scale monitoring projects, this table can become very huge. And doing some data wrangling to try to make sense of that data from the model outputs table or from other tables in the database, it can be a bit of a time sink and quite overwhelming, especially for people that aren't as comfortable with relational databases and SQL code. So extracting the information that you want becomes difficult. And also dealing with spatial data can be time consuming. And when you do decision analysis, often you're building custom tools for the problem at hand. So with AMSDM, we're trying to address those problems and come up with effective workflows for species distribution modeling and for structured decision-making using an AMMonitor database. For species distribution modeling, which, just a reminder for anyone who needs it, this is linking species observations to environmental data to get predictions of habitat suitability across a landscape. And with this new R package, AMSDM, we're hoping to create efficient and reproducible workflows. So you can have just single-step operations for each step of data wrangling, have very readable code, have it reproducible if you're publishing any of your work. You don't need pages and pages of code released with your paper. And when we're talking about species distribution models, there's many different data types and model types. I won't spend too much time on this, but it's here for anyone who wants to reference it later. But essentially, this just shows there's many different model types and different R packages that support those model types. And AMSDM will support all of these and more. So any kind of modeling that you need to do. It does that in a 6-step process where each step is one single line of code run. For example, step 1, you would extract your detections from the database, whether the species of interest was detected or not. And then steps 2 and 3, you're working with your raster and spatial data. So you make a template raster, and then to the correct specs that you would like, the extent and the projection that you would like. And then you use that template to clip, project, and stack all of your other spatial covariates. We also support getting weather data for temporal data. And then in step 5, you're shaping those detections into formatted encounter histories, and you're also getting your location and covariate data. So you have this very pretty, very well formatted object where you haven't really had to do much data wrangling at all, and you can pass that into your external modeling functions. So the hope is that it's easy, it's easy to understand, and easy to reproduce. And in terms of our decision tools, which would complete our adaptive management AMMonitor wheel here, decision making is really the goal of wildlife monitoring. We use what we learn in monitoring to make decisions about species management. And in order to do that, we also need to make decisions for the operation of the monitoring effort. So decision making is very wrapped up in everything to do with monitoring. And so we have just a suite of tools on our roster currently. Again, this is here for reference for anyone who wants to dive deeper and read the individual tools that we have. But we have some simulation functions, and then we have some decision tools for operations of a monitoring effort, such as optimizing tagging and optimizing field protocols. And then we have some species management decision tools, which will help you decide on your conservation actions for a number of different types of problems. So with that, I'm going to leave some time to discuss Amber, which, as a reminder, AMMonitor as an R package is one single user on a local computer. Everything is stored locally to one computer, and the database can be accessed by one person at a time. But for large-scale monitoring projects, or even moderate scale, often there's a lot of people involved, and those people need to be accessing the database at the same time for more efficient work. So with that, I'll pass it back to Larry, and he'll talk about our cloud-based version of AMMonitor, Amber.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. You actually set me up perfectly with a bunch of stuff I was going to say in the intro. So I'm going to go straight into sharing my screen and tell you a little bit more about Amber. So AMMonitor, standalone software, free. Anyone can download it. Anyone can install it. Amber is basically something that was born out of a need that we noticed amongst people we were working with to have a version of this where a lot of those sort of barriers to entry are lifted. And so whereas AMMonitor requires you to install it, Amber is not going to require any installation. It's available and accessible through a web portal through the web. You can basically think of Amber as AMMonitor in the cloud. And so being in the cloud, whereas AMMonitor, we needed to launch the app through R. And remember, I pointed out that little IP address that shows up in your web browser. Amber, it's as simple as going to a website and logging in. In AMMonitor, you can use local or cloud storage, but the user maintains that storage. Within Amber, we've been able to leverage UVM's research storage in order to house and back up all of the media data, of which you can accumulate many terabytes using these monitoring methods. So data storage is a real challenge, and so UVM research storage has been our solution there. Whereas AMMonitor uses a SQLite database. That's that single individual file that Kayley showed you how to create. And it's great. SQLite is a really well-supported, robust database, but being a file that sits on your computer, only one person can really log in and make changes at a time. So what we've done is we've taken that SQLite database and converted it to a format called Postgres, which supports simultaneous access, read-write access to multiple users. And then finally, while Kate and Kayley both showed you, we have support within our database for machine learning predictions of different taxa, that AMMonitor itself doesn't run those models. Many of those models are open source and could be run by individuals, but there's an upfront amount of effort to setting that up for an individual user. So for Amber, we actually run all of the machine learning models for the user. And so with that overview of some of the differentiation between Amber versus AMMonitor, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the Amber workflow and how we process data from start to finish, from the field all the way to the file system. And so it begins with a monitoring partner deploying a trail camera or an ARU, acoustic recording unit, in the forest. And we've been using a field-based mobile app called Survey123, which is a product of Esri, in order to collect metadata while people are actually out in the field. That is the best time to start collecting data, is while these equipments are being deployed. And so a little bit more detail about how this part of our workflow works. The user will submit a Survey123 survey with all the metadata about the visit. Remember here, visit from the survey form connects back to our visits table from the database. So this is a really streamlined way to get data right into your database. The user submits that Survey123 visit, and that creates a directory where the user can then upload their media files to, be they photos or recordings. The user will then get an email with a link to upload their photos. So it's really been a valuable tool for our collaborators who have used this to really streamline that process of getting data entered. Once the data is uploaded, we use our UVM virtual machine, which houses our database and connects to our storage to run all the processing of that metadata. And so it gets all the photos into your database, into the right storage, and at the same time, we'll analyze them with any machine learning models. And so, as Terri mentioned at the beginning, we can collect data at scales where it can become really challenging to actually manually inspect those all. And manual inspection would become a bottleneck that would really prevent us from figuring out what to do with these data and connecting them to the management and conservation decision-making piece that we really the goal of our monitoring. And so we have a library of many different types of machine learning models for both cameras and acoustic data. All encompassing, these models cover thousands of different species, and there's new models coming out all the time. And so we're frequently adding new models to our repertoire. And if there's a model that's not here that someone is interested in trying to run, we'll try to figure out how to add support for that model. And all of that data ends up back in the database and is accessible via our data portal. So that's that website that I mentioned where it looks almost visually identical to the open source software that I demonstrated earlier, that Shiny front end, except the user does have to log in. The database is password protected. And we do have different roles for users. So we have like a read-only role or a tagger role for if you're working with student interns and don't want to grant them full database access, but do want them to label data. And I won't go through all the features because many of them are the same as what I shared a few minutes ago. And then lastly, we do have this capacity for data releases. That's what Kate demoed a little bit. A lot of our data is up on Sciencebase. Our collaborators from state agencies have really enjoyed this because of FOIA requests. It just makes it easy to say, there's all of our data right there in the cloud. But data releases are not a necessity for all projects. But we encourage it in the spirit of open data and making sure that data can be leveraged and put to further use. And so, with this workflow that we've built up at UVM, we are really excited to be partnering with the UVM Spatial Analysis Lab going forward into the future in order to be able to offer the types of services that we have through the Vermont Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit. That includes really end-to-end support for these types of remote wildlife monitoring workflows, from study design to helping shepherd this AMBER workflow, which I've just demonstrated, to helping with the ecological modeling and scientific reports. And so, if you're interested more in this, you can feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to share more. But with that said, we wanted to just thank everyone for being here, whether you're here listening live or listening to the recording later in the future. We encourage you to give AMMonitor a try. The QR code will bring you to the code repository with instructions to get started on downloading. And obviously, in just a short hour, we've only scratched the surface. So if you have other questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us. And so with that, I think we will turn it over to questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you all so much. I have the poll everywhere opened up, and there's a couple questions. I'm going to start with the oldest one, although I see that someone responded in the poll, but I feel like for those that don't have it open, I'll read out the question. Is there a tutorial on creating SQL query statement in the package, or is there an external resource to learn about the SQL syntax?
And the answer to that one is yes, we do have a number of tutorials that cover the database. There's a tutorial called the database tutorial, and it does not assume a working knowledge of SQL. So it will explain to you what is a relational database, how are tables linked, what are the naming conventions that we've used in our database. So there's a bunch of support built into the AMMonitor tutorials. SQLite is also one of the most widely used database platforms in the world. And so there are a ton of resources out there in the web. There's, while always use it with caution, some of the large language model solutions now do allow you to, give database specs and create queries. So there's lots of other tools for query generation beyond just the traditional reading resources. Terri, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, just to add to that, yeah, thanks, Larry. So AMMonitor in the package, you can always use the DBI package to write a SQL query to extract information into R. But if you're not, if SQLite doesn't seem like it's your thing, you can always just read in the table. I think Kayley mentioned this, or Kate. You can always read those tables right into R and then just use plain old R statements to work with your data from there. And then we also have a fairly large number of R functions that actually run the SQLite queries for you. I think Kate showed that. So even R functions, we wrote these functions to go grab, certain pieces of information. In the background, we are executing the SQLite code, but you won't see that as an R user. You'll just see the result popped out. Having said that too, if you really do want to learn SQL, I always go to W3 Schools as my go-to for learning good practices for coding. I think I put that in the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next question. Can you share more about ScienceBase? How can people share their projects? Does the project need to be connected to a USGS specific project? How long is the process to archive data?
Whew, that's a great question. I guess I'll take that and you guys can jump in. So ScienceBase is a USGS repository intended to make accessible any kind of data set that is associated with USGS. Anybody can post their data sets on ScienceBase, but you need to have a USGS collaborator who will sponsor you in having a membership to it. It's free. It's just because it's a federal repository, it requires there's some oversight into who's signing up and using it. And then we have a page. I don't know if somebody wants to share who's got control of this screen? Is that you, Larry? Maybe you can just show the AMMonitor landing page.
Yeah, I can share that on the slide.
So we've created an AMMonitor kind of community at ScienceBase, and that's where we host our the releases that we've been involved with, and all of the projects that have been released. They're all open access then. I should note that they all have a section in there that would indicate any kind of use constraints. So sometimes the authors would say, please contact me if you want to use these data, just so that we're on the same page about everything. But yeah, so Kate is showing the USGS ScienceBase homepage for AMMonitor, and then if you click on any of those links, you can rehydrate any of those projects. Yeah, that's what a homepage looks like.
Kate, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that part of the ScienceBase release process, it goes through the peer review process, and part of that is just ensuring you have very thorough metadata for your project. And so if you were going to release if you were going to release an AMMonitor database, for example, you would just want to include in your metadata all of the descriptions of each of the tables in each of the columns. And I think we're discussing whether to make those functions that we used to produce these. We're discussing making that available, but currently they're not available yet, but possibly in the future.
And then one final interjection just to add that for these data releases, we do remove any pictures that have any PII, personally identifiable information. That includes removing pictures of people. Locations are somewhat obscured, so you get the general area where the media files were captured, not the exact locations. And we also do work with our collaborators to make sure that any sensitive species that should not have their exact locations or even general locations revealed, that those be removed before a data release.
Great. Next question. When do you expect AMSDM to be released?
We are actively in development, and our goal is to release it within the year, if all goes well. Possibly by the summer, but the latest I would say would probably be spring 2027. So spring of next year.
Awesome. Great. Regarding using Amber, can you manually upload data for projects that are in progress, or do you need to use Survey 123? Any elaboration would be appreciated.
Yeah, right now Amber's not set up in a way that you can go to the website and register a project. And so, we work individually with our collaborators to establish a contract where we determine what are the types of machine learning models that we're going to run, what's the type of metadata that you need to collect, and then we work with you to set up a Survey 123 form for your project specifically. And so the Survey 123 form is sort of what kicks off the the workflow, the data pipeline. And so we've been working mainly with that. There's another alternative that's not an Esri product that we've been experimenting with it as well. But maybe, I don't know, Terri, if you want to elaborate on that at all as well.
Hmm. So the other web application, do you mean, Larry?
Oh, no, just in general, if there's anything you want to
Oh,
say.
yeah. Well, I mean, um, yeah, so right now we're envisioning Amber, and as Larry mentioned, it's going to become part of the spatial analysis lab. So we're still kind of getting our our protocol set up and stuff. But it would begin with reaching out to one of us and saying, "Hey, I have an idea for a new project," or I've got 20 years of media files. They're a wreck, and I need some help organizing them so that I can turn them into knowledge. And either of those cases requires that you reach out to us first to try to understand how to go forward from there.
Great. Are AI detectors integrated into the workflow for processing acoustic data? E.g., does the user have to tag all of the recordings, or is it BirdNet or similar integrated in the workflow?
I'll jump on that one and pass it. Oh, go ahead, Kayley.
I was gonna say I can speak on that one. Yes, we
Okay.
do have AI detectors that we use for acoustic data. I personally am working on a project with a ton of acoustic data. We do use BirdNet. We are also in the middle of integrating a recent model called Hawkios that's specific kind of to the northern North America region. And have some more specialized models like that grouse drumming model that Larry had mentioned that we use because yeah, these audio data sets get absolutely massive very quickly. I've got about a 10,000 hour audio project that is primarily parsed first with machine learning for targeted tagging. So yes, we absolutely use them, and it's a big part of a lot of our acoustic workflows in particular. And actually, I should say as well, Kate, if you want to say anything about some of the fog work that you've done as well, that's another
Sure.
case where we've used acoustic models.
Yeah, and I'll just clarify. It's part of our Amber workflow. It's built into what we do at Amber, and AMMonitor, if you're using it on your own as a single user, it definitely would support that, but it would require that you set those workflows up yourself. But the work that I did with automated detection of Cuban tree frogs was using templates, and the AMMonitor R package and Amber both support really easy creation of templates. So cross-correlation templates or binary templates that you use to screen data, and you can get detections that way. And then you can also, what I did was add a second approach. So we screened first with the templates that we made with AMMonitor. And then we used secondary machine learning classifiers to filter out any false positives. And we got pretty high accuracy with that method. And so if you were just using AMMonitor on your own, that would be a very approachable way to build your own models. Or you could integrate any open source model that's available.
Yeah, and I'll just say any open source, there are many of them, for whatever purpose you might need. And if you can, many of them are written in Python. And so you follow the instructions that are from the Python authors, and it will produce your hits and detections. And then you would need to integrate those into your AMMonitor database. So we may at some point have some functions that support some packages, but I think for the most part, a lot of people are using whatever whatever Python package has been developed for their particular study. But highly recommend if you use an external package to get your detections, that you still make use of the AMMonitor database to keep track of all of that work.
Yeah, and then if I can piggyback on that, Terri, that we did try to envision, because there's so many new types of models coming out all the time, how we could structure the database in a flexible manner such that we'd be able to accommodate, future models that maybe haven't even been released yet. And so, whatever types of machine learning outputs get produced, there's probably a way to incorporate them into an AMMonitor database. And, in particular, though, if you are working with audio classification, to go back to what Kate mentioned, that the ability to build template models within AMMonitor is another strength. And we've had a colleague at University of Vermont who used AMMonitor to build their own classifier for wood frogs, for example, and had really good success with it. So, there's some functionality built in, others that you can extend. And it's exciting to see because models come out so quickly now. It's exciting to see what new model will come out tomorrow that sort of takes the place of the ones we use today.
Well, that's great. Those are all the questions from Poll Everywhere. That was a really great seminar. I feel like I learned a lot, and I want to thank you all for sharing that with all of us.